You want your players to hack and slash through hordes of enemies and truly feel like badasses as they destroy multiple enemies with a single spell or a single swing. But in Dungeons and Dragons, you can't accurately get this feeling across without combat turning into a slog and taking forever. Now, I know you can kill multiple enemies with a single spell, but even that takes multiple saving throws, and marshals have to hack it down swing by swing, one enemy at a time. But no more. I am throwing it back to D&D 4th edition and stealing a mechanic called minions. And as usual, I'm adding my own homebrew tweaks to it, plus introducing a new swarm mechanic for monsters in 5th edition. So let's go. So what is a minion and how do you make it in Dungeons and Dragons? You basically just take any monster and give it 1 health. That's literally it. They function completely normally. Everything from a small little goblin now only having 1 hit point all the way up to a full spellcaster with multiple different types of spells and abilities and actions they can do. But if they get hit, 1 health, they're dead. This actually makes thematic sense too, because whenever you fight things early on for the first time, maybe you had to go back and forth with it and it took a little bit to kill this thing, but then later on you're stronger, your abilities are better, you hit harder, all that kind of stuff. It would make more sense for you to just kill a goblin no matter what. And a lot of times with these enemies that aren't the main focus of combat, sometimes it's semantics anyway, like the player deals 10 damage and it had 11 health. Ooh, it has 1 hit point left. No, it's a minion. It just dies. And this starts getting in that feel that I talked about at the beginning, letting your players be able to hack through enemies as they approach some sort of goal or as they hack them down to fight someone who's that much stronger. This lets them be able to do that, and it speeds up combat and doesn't slow it down at the parts of the combat that don't matter, those little mooks and minions that you shouldn't be focusing on that much anyway. And also in D&D, action economy is a big thing, so you can add these into the mix so it's not just all your players versus 1 enemy. But if you do want to throw 1 enemy at your players, I have a whole video on Matt Colville's villain action-oriented system video. Check that out. But how you run these things is exactly like a normal monster. They have their own actions, they have their own abilities. The only difference is if they take any damage, they die. But you don't have to tell your players that these things are actually minions. Sometimes I don't tell my players at all that they're a minion, and it helps add to the tension. The player makes their attack roll and it hits. I know right now that monster's dead no matter what, but I still a lot of times have them roll damage anyway. Maybe they figure it out, maybe not, but that's just one of the extra things I can do as a DM to help add tension. So here's one of the first homebrew tweaks that I add to these things, and I call it mega minions. And it's basically taking a minion, instead of having 1 hit point where they take any 1 attack and they die, it's 2 hits. Like I said a second ago, these minions don't really matter in the big scale of combat, and it helps combat move. It helps you keep track of less stuff and focus on the more important things. So as soon as somebody hits this one thing, I'll mark down that it got hit, and then I describe it being injured or some way. And if it ever gets hit a second time, then it dies. But coach, what if one of the players deals a really huge hit or they crit? Well then sure, then it dies in 1 hit. You will know as a dungeon master what feels like a big hit or a small hit. And sometimes if the player rolls really high on their damage dice, or it's a huge spell that lands for a huge amount of damage, yes, take that mega minion and just have it die in 1 hit. But here's another tweak. If you don't like how abstract that is just give these things whatever the minion was or whatever type of CR rating it is. It doesn't matter. It just has 10 health now. But for me, a lot of times I like this 1, 2, or 3 hit system. Let's get into my version of swarms, and then I'm going to take both of these minion and swarm systems and combine them together. How swarms work, rules as written, is it pretty much works like any other normal minion, which is what part of it feels bad to me. Usually they occupy 1 square. It's just a bunch of creatures like bats, bugs, insects, rats, whatever, all in 1 square, and they have usually a higher than normal attack damage, and once the swarm reaches half health, it deals half damage. And that part feels good. That part feels like a swarm, but I'm going to run with it. For me, these are really fun to run as a dungeon master, and I'll show you literally what I'd have down behind the screen so I can see and help me track what I'm about to show you. My DC method here is to take this swarm and break it up into different chunks, not just its health, not just its damage, it's plus the hit, and maybe sometimes even armor class as well. So again, this is me taking rules as written and running with it, because they have a pool of health, and at half health, something happens to its mechanics. But for me, I chunk it out not just in half health, but maybe 10 health chunks. But how can you run this without it getting too complicated and too much for you to keep track of as a dungeon master? Here's an example of a swarm of insects. So my swarm of insects has a total of 20 health that I've separated into 4 5 hit point chunks. It also has a +4 to hit, and it deals 4 d4 damage. And this swarm of insects buzzing all over the place has an armor class of 10, because there's a huge swarm of them. You swing through it, it's not that hard to hit. But now is where the fun begins, because once you deal these 5 hit point chunks and you hack this thing down, things start to change. At the start of the fight, the swarm would have 20 hit points with a +4 to hit and 4d4 damage. But as soon as that 5 damage is dealt to it, and now it's 1 chunk less, now its damage also changes. Once it's at 15 health, I would do +3 to hit and +3d4 for damage. When it gets down to 10 HP, it's at half health and now deals +2 to hit and 2d4 damage. Only 5 hit points remaining. Now it's only a little small remaining swarm, +1 to hit, for 1d4 damage. I'm going to show you another example of orcs here in a second, but I'm not done with these bees. The armor class also changes, and that makes sense because when you have a huge swarm of rats or a swarm of insects or whatever, it's very simple to hit it at first, but as you start hacking it down, it would get harder to hit. There's less of them to swing through. So here's the last little missing piece of the cheat sheet is the armor class. Yes, they start off with an armor class of 10 whenever they're at that full 20 health, but every chunk they lose, they actually gain armor class. There's less of these bees swarming around. It gets harder and harder to hit them. So whenever they lose that 5 hit point chunk, now that armor class goes from a 10 up to a 12. And then whenever they're half health, it goes up to a 14. And when they're only at 5 health left, there's only a few bugs swarming around. It's 16 armor class. It's a lot harder to hit. Now, granted, it's only dealing 1 or +1 to hit for 1d4. So it's not that bad, but it gives players more of a choice of kind of how you would handle a swarm. Maybe you hack it down at the beginning and then leave the stupid bug alone and go do something else. Or maybe you add some sort of constitution saving throw, poison, disease effect to these things, and you would want to kill them. So now we're going into overtime with some next level homebrews. What if you combine these mechanics of minions and swarms together to create a new experience that's pretty fun and get that right feel going at the table? What would something like a swarm of orcs look like? You describe 6 orcs charging into the battlefield. You get 6 different orc minis out or tokens, however you're playing, and they swarm the battlefield. But these orcs aren't the main focus of battle. There's plenty of other stuff going on or whatever it is at your table, so go with me on this. These 6 orcs make 1 attack roll together. This also speeds up combat and doesn't have to make you roll on all these 6 different attack rolls for these things. You make 1 roll, add their modifier to it, that's their attack roll. But coach, that's crazy. What if they spread out around the battlefield and 3 orcs go to this person over here and 3 over here? Sure, who cares? That 1 attack roll that you rolled applies to both characters. So if you roll a 19, that's a 19 versus that character's armor class and a 19 versus that one. If that one rolls really low, they all miss. If that one rolls really high, they all hit. Or if the players have different armor classes, one might hit and the other might not. And the damage here is simple too. You just take whatever the swarm's damage is, roll that damage, and then divide it between how many targets you hit. Let's say you make that attack roll and both characters are getting hit by this orc swarm. You roll the damage. It's 21 damage. You cut it in half. This person gets 10 and this person gets 11 because you like them less. Or you can round down and be nice. But hold on before I lose you on this. This swarm of orcs also shares a health pool and you'll start to see some advantages. So here's my cheat sheet for this orc swarm. They have, as a group, 60 hit points, and I've chunked that out into 10 hit point groups to represent each of the 6 of them. 10 times 6. The overall swarm as a group has a +10 to hit for that 1 roll they make, and they roll 6d6 plus 6. You can see where this is going already probably. They have an armor class of 12. And we'll get into that too. For each chunk of 10 health, I describe an orc dying, remove a mini, whatever, and it loses what's in the parentheses next to the little thing. So that +10 to hit goes down by 1 each and every time. So that +10 will start off at +10, but each time it goes down, it'll go to 9, 8, 7. You get the idea. And that 6d6 will eventually turn into 1d6 plus 1 for each one of the orcs that fall. But I also wanted to show the armor class in this situation would not change. In fact, it almost should be the opposite, because if there's a bunch of orcs protecting each other as they die and fall off and there's just one left, I actually think it would probably be easier to hit that last one standing. So now we're homebrewing on the fly. I've never done that before, but you could start off with a very high armor class that goes down as the group hits it as well, but this can also lead to some snowbally stuff, so I might not do that. So now how would this look at your game table? If a barbarian swings a huge hit for 25 damage, boom, kills 2 of them in 1 hit, and a 3rd one's looking injured. But now here's where some pretty interesting stuff can happen. Let's say we keep going with this analogy and they dealt 25 damage and that 60 health gets reduced to 35, and there's 3 orcs over there and 3 over here. He's killed 2 of them and there's 1 standing. He makes a second attack and deals another 15 damage. So technically this swarm of orcs had 35 hit points would get reduced down to 20, and that one would die. But then how did this barbarian kill one of the orcs over here? Does that extra damage carry over and kill one of these orcs or not? How do you explain it? This is a great opportunity and a great choice for you as a dungeon master to say, you could totally say and run it a little bit more strict and be like, okay, cool. It only deals with the people within your attack radius or within the spell or whatever. But another way to do this, and I have done this before and it's been pretty cool if it fits the right vibe at your group table, is that damage does carry over. And this barbarian now has to describe a role play opportunity. How did you kill that orc across the battlefield? Did you throw a javelin across in some awesome epic moment? Or maybe the players that are around that orc now get to describe, while not on their turn, how they did it based on something the barbarian did. Or if that doesn't make sense to you, just hold on to it. That health pool still gets reduced down to 20, and then the next time somebody deals damage to these 3 orcs over here, it's now another one dies. So all the math would still check out behind the screen on your side. You'd still know it has 20 hit points and only deals 2d6 plus 2, whatever. All that stuff's still simple. You describe everything, but the description would be whenever the next time that group of orcs, the 3 over here, dies, another one falls to keep everything back to neutral. And that's the thing, guys, like with all my homebrews, I want you to take what feels right or not at the table. I just gave you 3 different ideas for how you could potentially run that if you even want to do these things or not. Maybe you just want to do minions and just swarms and don't want to try and blend them together. But with either of these systems, there's lots of things for you to tweak around and change. Whatever the starting pool is, how much incremental chunks happen. Maybe it's 2 huge trolls that have 60 health and they have a halfway and it's a swarm of trolls. I don't know. Even when I was homebrewing this swarm of orcs for this video, when I started off originally, I had their plus to attack be 12. You know, because there's 6 orcs and I gave them each 2, so 2 times 6. I had a plus 12 to hit and then 66 damage plus 6 and all that kind of stuff. Each orc that died was a -2, eventually getting down to just a +2 for that last orc. And I could also see that totally being a thing. There's 6 orcs in here. They have a better chance to attack. They're all together. They're helping each other, all that kind of stuff. I could totally sign off on that one, but I went with a more neutral balance of giving them a solid number and adding only +1s onto that. Further showcasing how easy this is on the Dungeon Master behind the screens to run off. You can just simply mark off things and circle the new ones, which is yet another example of why this system is so easy to keep track of for the Dungeon Master behind the screen to run these swarms off. Timeout. If you like all this monster stuff, I have an entire monster homebrew PDF with even more systems to make your homebrew life a lot easier. I have a 1-page table to help you make monsters in seconds that I also made a video about last week, and this one thing also has 100 different monster abilities, 10 custom monsters, 4 monstrous subclasses, including a druid and a ranger who both literally turn into a monster to do their fighting. Everything I just said is available over on my Patreon during the month of March for March Monster Madness. Get it? I am the dungeon coach, so I had to do the sports joke there. But every single month I do these homebrew and Dungeon Master tip PDFs. But if you're watching this video into the future, then I'll still have a link down in the description so you can get over my website. But my patrons always get everything earlier and cheaper. So click right here if any of that sounds cool, or you just want to help support what I do here. I hope you can now throw hordes of enemies at your party and give them some epic moments hacking through them all. So until next time, stay creative and think outside that box. Peace.